Hello, welcome to my channel. Today I have some really scary stories lined up for you. Don't forget to subscribe and like this video. Get comfortable and listen to the best spooky tales. Winter had arrived again, but this winter was different than the others. This winter, my aunt and uncle decided to go on a ski trip, leaving their house for me to look after. You would have expected me to grumble and moan with the additional chore of checking in on a relative's house every day, but I told myself not to. After all, I was being paid. Yes, they decided to pay me a hefty amount just to look after their house and pay attention to their most precious possessions for them. What was so precious to them that needed the extra care? Their carnival equipment stored in their humongous basement. You see, my aunt and uncle owned a huge piece of land behind their house, which they used to generate most of their yearly profits off carousels, unbeatable ring-tossing games, and candy floss. When winter came, the rides were covered with huge canvases and the little stores were stored in the basements. Some of the arcade machines had to be brought in too, because they did not want them to get rusty. Hence, everything I would consider fun were now stored in the basement for me to play with. The day after my aunt and uncle left for their ski trip, I headed to their house in the morning to give it a check. Typically, the first place I headed to was the basements. As I paid my first visit to the crowded yet neatly organized storeroom, if I can call it that, I noticed a clown statue positioned right in the middle of the stairs heading downwards. That was a rather odd place to place a clown statue, and maybe it was a way of telling people not to go down to the basement. But surely that rule did not apply to me, so I made my way by squeezing past the statue, careful not to touch it because, honestly, it scared me a little. After I had made it past the clown statue, I spent the entire day playing all the arcade games with the bag of coins I found in one of the drawers. I left reminding myself to find the key to the machines to collect the coins from them before my aunt and uncle returned. Days passed and the arcade games got boring. The time finally came for me to start grumbling about this extra chore, which I was still being paid for, but things changed when my friend begged me to show her the house in the basement. She wanted a free ride and I thought, why not? If the two of us were to game together, it wouldn't be so boring. One afternoon, I decided to invite two of my friends to come over. And when I showed them the way to the basement, one of them asked, why is there a clown statue in the middle of the stairs? Yeah, it's creeping me out. My other friend added, it's nothing, just walk around it, I said. Can't you move it? It's taking up more than half of the steps, and I'm not as skinny as you, the friend who went on more diets than I did, said. You're not fat. I'll just call my aunt and ask, I replied and left my friends. Once I was at the kitchen, I heard the arcade machine starting up and was sure they were having a blast already. Wanting to join them, I decided to just make a quick call to my aunt. The line was pretty bad that afternoon, but I heard her well enough. Aunt Marge? I asked when I didn't hear a hello when she picked up the line. Yes, who is this? It's me, Jessica. Oh, how is everything going, Jessica? No troubles, I hope. And Marge sounded clear, even over the static in the background. Everything is fine. I was just wondering if I could move the clown statue down to the basement. It's blocking the stairs right now, and it's kind of hard to go up and down. What? Aunt Marge replied. I sighed. Did I have to repeat everything over the bad line? I said there is a clown statue blocking the stairs. Honey, we don't have a clown statue. My aunt said, sounding not at all like her usual self. What? I said, we do not have a clown statue. Oh, I heard her the first time, all right. Immediately, I shouted for my friends. No, I screamed for them. Moments later, I heard them climbing up the stairs and running into the kitchen, asking what's the matter. We got dough now, I said, as I hurried to the door. Following behind me quickly, with so many different questions spilling from each of them, I only managed to catch one when we finally exited the house. So where did you put the clown statue? I didn't even bother to answer. Hope didn't like being home without her parents. All of her friends did, and they had all shared wild tales of what exactly they had done when their parents were gone. They all seemed to get a sense of satisfaction at disobeying their parents and defying their rules. Hope didn't have a rebellious streak. It wasn't that she was a goody two-shoes. It was just that her parents had always been reasonable with her, and in turn, she complied with their wishes. On this particular night, Hope's parents had gone out for dinner and a movie and probably wouldn't be back until very late at night. Hope flopped down on the couch and picked up her book. It was a novel by Stephen King. Before long, she was beginning to grow a little nervous. Her eyes flitted around the room, seeing she was still alone, as she relaxed a little, before noticing the open door that led into the kitchen. The light in the room was out, and the darkness was unsettling. Hope couldn't shake the feeling that something inside the kitchen was watching her, perhaps leering with a sinister grin. Hope tried to continue reading her book, but kept getting distracted. At last, she finally got up and ran towards the kitchen door. She slammed it shut and drew back in one quick movement. as if expecting a hand to snake out of the blackness and grab her wrist. Needless to say, this did not happen. She let out a sigh of relief and even laughed at herself a little before going back to the warm comfort of the couch. Instead of retrieving her book, Hope simply grabbed the remote and flicked on the television. She reached over and turned off the lamp on the nearby nightstand, before adjusting herself on the couch, curling into a cozy position. The television was displaying a rerun of the newest Criminal Minds. Hope swiftly changed the channel to the Cartoon Network. She had had enough scary stories for one night. She glanced ruefully at her library book, which was now discarded on the floor. Hope slowly turned her head back to the television screen and, in her snug posture, gradually fell asleep. About an hour later, Hope was awoken by a sudden stream of light hitting her face. The light was shining in through her window. She winced and turned away, moaning softly and cursing the light for interrupting her slumber. Just as suddenly as the light had come, it was suddenly gone. Thinking that a car must have come up her street, Hope shut her eyes and tried to blot everything out, from the blaring of the TV to the gentle rain that was beginning to fall outside. The light came again, cutting through the window and illuminating the living room before shutting off once more. It seemed to be coming in short and long bursts. Hope blinked sleep from her eyes before sitting up. Why are there lights coming from outside at this time of night? She wondered to herself, and why are they coming in quick bursts like that? She eventually realized that one of her neighbors must have a faulty garage light. Thinking well of herself for having solved such a mystery, Hope turned to the television and, grabbing the remote, turned the volume up a few notches. Then something very peculiar happened. The television shut off. The power had gone out. Power outages themselves were not uncommon where Hope lived, and it really did not surprise her. What did surprise her was how the light outside kept flicking on and off. Hope realized that the light that was flashing outside couldn't be a garage light now that the power was out. Fear welled up inside of her and her heart began to beat fast. What if someone is trying to lure me outside? She thought, I might be being stalked by a madman. She realized that she was trembling all over, and she grabbed a blanket from the far end of the couch. That's when a more disturbing thought hit her. What if he can see me right now? Hope looked at the window and a feeling of unease crept over her. She definitely had the distinct feeling that she was being watched. Hope made up her mind then and there what she would do. In a quick movement, she vaulted herself over the couch and huddled in the darkness. The flashing lights continued and seemed to grow more insistent, more impatient. Hope crawled along the floor before reaching up and grabbing the doorknob to the kitchen. She slowly turned it and slipped inside. She shut the door behind her, blocking out the flashing of the lights, but she could still see them underneath the crack of the door. She moved through the darkness and grabbed a kitchen knife from the counter. She sat down in one of the chairs at the far end of the kitchen and watched as the lights became slower, as if discouraged before eventually stopping altogether. Relief flooded over her, and in spite of herself, she let out a smile. An hour later, Hope's parents came home. They opened the front door and were greeted with silence. They called out Hope's name and got no response. When they went into the kitchen, a ghastly sight awaited them. Hope sat in one of the chairs at the far end. A horrible expression of shock was evident on her face, and her throat had been torn into by a vicious blade. Hope's own kitchen knife lay useless on the floor beside the chair. The police came immediately after Hope's parents called and began searching the grounds around the house at once. They were very surprised to find a young teenage girl close to a ditch across the street from their house. There were multiple stab wounds all over her body, and it was quite obvious she had been murdered in the same manner as Hope. Clutched in the girl's hand was a small flashlight. She had been trying to signal for help and trying to warn whoever was inside Hope's house. I've thought about telling this story for quite a while now, and first and foremost I want to inform you from the very beginning that everything I am about to write is true. I will not be adding anything for the sake of the story, nor will I be using stupid stereotypical buzzwords to make this seem more terrifying. All I'll be doing is telling the truth. That's all I want to do. So I'll start from the beginning and give a little background. When I was a kid, I began realizing I had a little insight on what was going to happen before it did. Now by that, I mean I sometimes knew what some kid in the class would say next whilst bothering the teacher, or I knew when the phone was going to ring. That sort of thing. I didn't think much of it as a sweet 10 or 11-year-old. I just saw it as pretty cool, I guess. Then came on the feelings of I've been here before. Whenever I went new places, I could never remember when though, I began getting deja vu regularly, which would last maybe 10 or 15 minutes. I'd usually sit back in awe and quietly mouth everything everyone was saying. As I got older, I began referring to it as a sensitivity I had. It wasn't until I was about 14 I realized I also had this sensitivity to spirit. I live in Ireland. My parents went all out on a beautiful 250-year-old house. I mean, knocking down sections, rebuilding, re-roofing, repaying everything. We got to pick our own rooms. I chose the attic. It was terrifying at first, but once we rebuilt it a bit, painted it, refloored it, and all that good stuff, it looked pretty fantastic. The only part of the room that still bothered me was the small hatch in the ceiling up into a small boiler room. Just looking at gave me a bad feeling from the beginning, so I had placed my wardrobe under it and put stuffed animals on top to cover it up, so I wouldn't have to see it. The first night in that room was quite intense. All through the night I heard scratches and banging coming from the boiler room. I put it down to being new house noises until I heard footsteps run across the ceiling. Over and over again. This happened every night. I remember mentioning it to my father. He laughed and said unless there's a 4 feet tall person living up there, you're not hearing anything, followed by the famous "you're probably just dreaming." I knew I wasn't. This did freak me out a lot, but surprisingly, I just got used to it and ignored it. Each night I'd find myself thinking about how sad I was, which again was odd for me because I had never had any problems. I was always a happy kid. However it was to get worse, I'll never forget the night it all went downhill. It was just a regular night, I guess, and I had gone to bed and fallen asleep. Wrath woke suddenly in the middle of the night. Within a second of waking up, I was overcome with terror and dread. I felt something watching me again, only this time I saw it. I slowly turned my head to the left of me, and there I saw it, a dark black figure staring at me. Its head was cocked forward from its body looking down at me. I thought I was dreaming, so I sat up, blinked, and rubbed my eyes. No such luck, it was still there, only it looked as shocked as I was. It jolted back perhaps when it realized I could see it, and slithered down the side of my bed, across the bottom of my bed, as disappeared into the darkness. I couldn't do anything, only sit there in terror and weep quietly. I had never been so scared. I stayed on the couch for a few days after that and avoided my bedroom completely. I changed after that night. I couldn't eat and I couldn't sleep. I couldn't do anything. I was just a terrified mess. It wasn't long before I decided enough was enough and braved the room once again. Due to sheer exhaustion, I managed to fall asleep on my bed for what felt like 5 minutes before waking abruptly. It was there again, only this time its face is directly opposite mine. This time though, it was in broad daylight, as I had only managed sleep at about 6 a.m. I think it's fair to say I shot my pants. Some time passed and I'm not sure how thinking back on it, but I did manage to brush all this off and I did continue to stay in that room. It was quiet for a while, but before long I began waking with cuts on my body, slices in my skin, mostly on my back and shoulder blades. Each night as I tried to sleep, I felt some invisible force clasp my neck. It got harder to breathe each night. I became very depressed, finding myself sitting awake at all hours, knowing I was being watched and contemplating just ending my life. That bedroom became a pit of despair. My father was and still is to this day very skeptical of me and my stories. My mother not so much. She got frightened by what had been happening and insisted we call the parish priest. Typically Irish, I know. Although I'm not religious in any way, I sort reached the stage of I'll try anything, so I went ahead with it. The priest called over. He read whatever it is they read in situations like these, splashed holy water everywhere, and stuck a cross he got from the Vatican in Rome up in the room. That wasn't enough for me. Since I wasn't religious, I felt it was hypocritical of me to believe that would work, so I just moved rooms. I'm still terrified of that attic and have only been in there for brief moments. When I've had to be since, I just assumed the attic was haunted and left it at that. The new room was fine. I was more or less fine for about a year. Still slightly traumatized, might I add. And I thought that was it until I moved into a new house for college, and it all started again. I moved towns for college and found a perfect house with some of my very good friends. I had hoped to put everything that happened in my hometown to rest. I was very optimistic about my fresh start. I moved to a really historic city, and the house I live in now is about 150 years old. The first night myself and my housemates stayed there, we were unsettled by scratching noises. Coming from the walls, we put it down to new house noises. I should have known better, right? And brushed it off. We ignored the nightly banging and scratching. One day I decided to bring it up due to something that I thought was a bit strange. I explained that I was in bed one night trying to sleep when I felt my body jerking slightly, as if something was pulling on my quilt. I expected them to laugh, but one of my housemates sat up and explained the strange experience he had only nights before. He said he was in his room, trying to go asleep, and he had had his feet hanging over the end of the bed. He said he was just asleep when something grabbed onto his foot. He said he pulled his legs up to his chest and lay there for a while, pretty shaken. We all went a bit quiet then, and just gazed around the house, getting more and more creeped out. It wasn't long before shit hit the fan in the house. At 6 a.m. every morning, I heard a light wailing coming from one corner in my bedroom, and every morning I put my head to the wall to listen. Every time I called my housemates to hear it, it stopped. Typically, I think they started to think I was going crazy. But it took a long time before they heard it as well. I was pretty relived when they said the words, "Yeah, hear it too," because I was beginning to question my sanity. There was then daily banging from the kitchen, switches flicking on and off, and the likes. We kind of just laughed it off all the time. Knew something was up though when I saw a black figure again. I had been sitting on the couch and could see into the kitchen from the corner of my eye. I happened to catch a glimpse of it staring in at me. I looked over quickly, it was gone. I ignored it and decided not to say anything. Ooh, I didn't get too freaked out since I was kind of used to it. At that point, I guess, but I lost it slightly when one of my housemates let something slip. We were all at a party, and one of my housemates turned to me and said something along the lines of, "Can you believe what our other housemate saw the other night?" I had no idea what he was talking about, so I confronted the other guy. He sighed and explained how he didn't want me to be scared and wasn't going to say anything, but went on to tell me how he saw a black figure in the bathroom. I wondered if it was the same black figure I saw. We were all very wary in the house from then on. Then came the night it all went downhill again. It's only me and my housemate who had seen the black figure. The other had returned home for the weekend, like we were both in the living room working on college stuff when we heard a bang. We both stopped and looked at each other with that shit look. We knew it was starting again. Only this time it was much more intense. There was banging coming from all sides of the house. It was like someone was quickly moving around the entire house, banging the walls and stomping on the floor. This went on for a few minutes as we sat there in terror. Then it stopped and the banging continued from just one area of the house, my room. We were kind of in that stage of nervously laughing and looking around. I had been sitting on the couch and my housemate was sitting opposite me on a beanbag. He was saying something to me when his face dropped. He went completely white and just stared beyond my shoulder. I asked him what was wrong. All he said was we needed to get out of that room now, and that I wasn't to sleep in my room tonight since the banging was still coming from there. I calmly asked him, what did he see? He ignored me, just gathered our stuff and began going into the other room. I stopped him and calmly asked again, what did you see? He was looking past me again and explained how he saw a black figure sliding across the wall directly behind me. We both left that room and locked ourselves into his. We just sat there for a while in silence. I began thinking about all the freaky shit that has gone on in my short lifespan. I began thinking about the significance of these black figures and began wondering if there was multiple black figures or if it was all the same one. The same black figure I woke up to that night years ago. That was when it dawned on me for the first time. Maybe I am the one who is haunted. My family have been living in the same house for almost 10 years, but not once did we ever encounter anything supernatural or creepy, probably because we built this house ourselves and made sure no dead bodies were buried in the soil, so we didn't have to worry about previous families having dark histories or such. Nobody has died in the house either, which is why when something disturbing finally happened to me on a certain afternoon, I couldn't come up with an explanation why it happened. It was summer break, you know, those times when you have no school stuff to worry about, and you can lay around the house all day. Most of the time, the only people in the house were me, my younger brother, and my grandma since my mom was working and my older brother had a summer job. After spending hours on the computer, I finally got bored and decided to take a quick bath since that afternoon felt so humid and hot. You see, our bathroom door has this stained glass design or something I'm not good at describing different types of glass so you can see the silhouette of people passing by the door, but the other details like eyes, nose, or mouth are not clear. When my mom got it installed, I hated it because I was a girl and I don't like the idea of people seeing me while inside there, even if it's just my silhouette, because if you come close enough to the glass, the better the person on the other side will see you. I had two brothers, so I don't really understand why the hell my mom installed that thing. Well, anyway, my bath was going fine, until I turned my head and realized a tall figure was standing right outside the door. It surely wasn't my grandma since she's a short person, so I concluded it was my brother because that guy is freaking tall even if he's younger than me. "Hey, I'm showering. Go away," I yelled, but he didn't even move an inch. He's probably just trying to annoy me again, so decided to throw a shampoo bottle against the door. "Go away." Thankfully, he did go away and I just finished my shower while feeling a bit pissed. As soon as I got dressed, I went to confront him in his room. He was busy playing in his PC. "What were you doing standing in front of the bathroom like a creep while I was showering?" "I wasn't creeping on you," he simply said without even looking at me. I just rolled my eyes and didn't press any further since he tends to lie when caught doing some crap and it won't be easy to make him admit to it anyway. I decided to just shrug it off because he didn't do it again. the rest of the day, so maybe he was just bored that moment. The very next day, I was taking a noon shower again, and when I looked at the door, there he was again, just standing there and probably watching my silhouette move as I showered. Dan? Go away, I screamed, feeling annoyed but partly creeped out by my brother's actions. I was starting to think that he probably discovered some porn online and is now starting to fantasize about stuff. It was downright creepy. Go away or I call mom. Finally, he started to slowly turn around and walk away, then disappeared into the left hallway. I was about to let out a relieved sigh, but then a different silhouette came running from the opposite hallway and stopped right in front of the door. My blood ran cold when I realized that this person is surely my brother. I can clearly see his brown skin and even the yellow tint of his SpongeBob shirt. The other silhouette, however, was equally tall but pure black, as if just a shadow. What did you say? He called out like he really didn't hear what I had been screaming. I wasn't able to answer because I was still completely shocked about what just happened. It was like my mind just went blank. Hey, you okay? My brother's voice snapped me out of it, and I hurriedly got dressed. When I got out, I was greeted by his confused face. I probably looked so pale because I could still feel myself numb from all that shock. I pulled my brother to the living room and started to explain everything to him. He didn't tease or laugh at me because even though we piss off each other, most of the time when one of us is totally shaken up, we know something is surely wrong. He explained that he didn't hear anybody else sneak into the house, and we even have 5 dogs outside for Christ's sake, and none of them barked even once. We didn't want to conclude that it was something paranormal since, just like I said earlier, we never experienced such things in the house after living here for a very long time. And it happened in broad daylight. Don't paranormal entities prefer to haunt people at night? We decided to approach our grandma since she's the one that has experienced odd things during her younger days. All she told us was that spirits tend to visit homes once in a while, even if they don't know the people living in there. She even joked that maybe that certain spirit just fancied me. But that idea only scared me more. The 3 of us agreed to keep the matters from my mother since she's a full-blown skeptic and would probably just nag me, saying that I'm reading too much horror stuff. It was already comforting enough for me that 2 people sincerely believed my story. Since that last encounter, I don't enter that bathroom without praying and praying to be kept safe from whatever that thing was. For all I know, it could be a demon, and I sure as hell don't want a demon stalking me. It didn't happen again for a few days, as if to give me a break, but then it visited me again, as if for one final goodbye. Being the very unfortunate me, it was late at night, and most of the lights were already off, although none of us were asleep yet. I was the last to take a shower, but I made sure I had my phone inside the bathroom with me since the fear was still crawling around my system. The time I was glued to the stained glass. As I tried to shower as quickly as I can, I was only halfway done washing away the shampoo when I saw the same black figure slowly walk closer to the door. I actually fucking saw how it appeared from the dark hallway, like it has always been there all the time. Heart racing, I slowly reached for my phone, letting the shower stay on so that thing hopefully wouldn't know that I already noticed it. I was already letting out shaky breaths as I went to my brother's contact number. As soon as I pressed call, my brother's phone started ringing from somewhere. In the house, the figure suddenly reached for the doorknob and started to try and open it. The knob was shaking so violently that I thought it would actually break. At that point, I just lost it. I screamed and let out the loudest scream I ever made in my whole life, hoping that everyone would hear it and come to my rescue. I just felt so fucking helpless, and it was the most horrifying thing I've ever experienced. I felt like whatever that thing was, it wanted to hurt me. When loud footsteps echoed in the hallway, the figure quickly stepped back and immediately disappeared back into the darkness, as if it was never even there. When I could hear my brothers and my mom calling for me outside, I fumbled to wrap myself with a towel and open the door. I hugged whoever was nearest to me and cried. Jumbled words of explanation came out of my mouth, and I just hoped that they understood me. Thankfully, my mom didn't nag me and stayed beside me the whole night to assure me that I'll be okay. Immediately after that, my mom had that door removed and replaced it with a normal, solid one. Since then, I haven't seen that thing again, though I couldn't deny that I still have this constant fear that one day it will pop in my face and finally get me. I never knew what exactly it was and what it wanted from me. For all I know, it's actually just standing behind that solid door, staring at the plain white surface like it could still see me. I pulled the mask over my face and crept up the stairs, my excitement mounting with each creaky step. I felt the heat of my own breath, unable to fully escape through the mouse slit. When I got to the top, I cracked open the basement door and peered into the living room through 2 round eye holes. She wasn't there, but I knew where she was. I could hear tap water running. She was in the kitchen. I slipped off my shoes and walked slowly, carefully across the hardwood floor. The rush of running water grew louder, and then I heard the sound of someone talking. Did she have visitors? I took a few more quiet steps. No. She was listening to a podcast over the speakers. I stuck my head around the corner, and there she was at the sink, her back towards me, her long brunette hair pulled up into a bun. I took a deep breath. It was hot in there, under that heavy mask, but I couldn't take it off. Not until it was done. It was time. I moved quickly until I was right behind her. I reached out and grabbed her shoulder. She snapped her head around, and as she got a look at me, I smiled behind the mask to see her eyes go wide in fear. I was prepared to end it there, but she screamed and brought a knee up right into my balls. Oof. As I was hunching over, she gave me a shove and I crashed into the island behind me. I slumped to the ground in agony and looked in real fear as she twirled around, grabbed a knife from the sink, and raised it up. Hold on. I groaned, pulling my mask off. It's me. When she saw me, she froze, the giant knife still there up in the air. I could tell that my wife was not very impressed. What the fuck are you doing? She asked. Where the fuck did you get that creepy mask? I coughed, still holding my hand up in the air in a plea for mercy. Down in the basement, I think it was Dad's, I said. I was trying to give you a little scare for fun. Jesus, Bill, said Debbie. I was ready to kill you. And honestly, I'm still not quite decided on that. There's not a jury in America that would convict me. Not after they saw that creepy-ass mask. Put the knife down, honey, I said. She threw the knife back into the sink and bent down. I was still crumpled in pain on the floor. Let me see that, she said. Picking up the mask and then examining it, I guessed that it was made of stone. It was perfectly round, with 2 round eye holes at levels just different enough to cause a sense of unease. There was, as mentioned, a slit for a mouth. A row of sharp teeth was etched above and below the mouth, and then another row on top of those. It's heavy, said Debbie, and looks ancient. Do you think your father found this on one of his exhibitions? Yeah, I said, starting to recover a little. It was in a stash box down in the basement, along with a knife that looks like it's made of bone. I was gonna bring the knife up with me, but now I'm glad I didn't. We should get it assessed, said Debbie, running her fingers over the mask. Could be worth something. I'm sure it is, said, getting to my feet on wobbly legs. But I was hoping we could keep it, at least for a while as a memento of Dad. I mean, if we ever need money, then yeah, we'll look into selling it. But we don't need money right now, not after the inheritance. And, well, I just still miss him, you know. But plus, it's a cool mask, isn't it? A good conversation starter. She handed the mask back. It's creepy. It scared the shit out of me. She sighed. If you want to hang it up somewhere, it's got to go in your study. Someplace where I don't have to look at it. At Roger Wentworth's retirement party. Old Roger had been my father's friend since they both started teaching at the college where I now taught. They spent many an evening sipping on scotch at my father's house where I now lived. So when he finally announced his retirement, it only felt right to host the party. Derek Nielsen was in attendance. He was about my age and also taught at the college. It turned out that we actually grew up in that same town, a few years apart. While my life had been pretty much easy street since day one, born to a well-off professor, and following in his footsteps, Derek's had been anything but. He came from a working-class family and had lost his father at a young age. He never talked about it, but I knew that his childhood had been rough. Yet he had clawed himself out of a life of misery to find success in the academic world. Most of the other professors at our college were the same as me, born and bred in a buttermilk world of soft pillows and fancy cars. Derek stood out to me and we became fast friends. On the evening of Roger's party, as soon as I saw Derek walk in, I excused myself from the conversation that I was having. I went to the fridge, got 2 beers, and found Derek. Come on, I said. I want to show you something. You'll appreciate this. Derek took the beer and popped off the cap with a lighter. Sure thing, bud, he said. I led him to my study. I found this mask in a box of the old man's stuff. Check it out. I pointed up to the mask hanging from the wall. The bone knife was mounted just below it. Derek dropped his beer on the floor and went white. Is this some kind of sick fucking joke? He demanded. What? What do you mean a joke? The look of fear on Derek's face made me start to feel scared. It can't be the mask, can it? It's unsettling, but it's not terrifying like that. I know you to sit down, said Derek. Sure, bud, I said, wheeling my desk chair over to him. Sorry about that. I didn't mean to scare you. I just thought you'd get a kick out of it, that's all. Derek looked at me with intensity. Tell me right now if this is a joke. I never told you about this, but maybe you found out anyway. I don't know what you mean, I said. I need a drink, sure, beer. Something hard, said Derek, now staring at the mask in bewilderment. I'll be right back. I stepped over the spilled beer and headed over to the liquor cabinet. Debbie was there, talking to somebody. I was starting to feel a little dizzy and things were blurring together. "Where did you get off to?" asked Debbie. "I showed Derek the mask," I said. It didn't go well. I poured out a tall scotch. "We should really get rid of that thing. It's creepy." I gave a vacant nod and went back to my study. Derek was still sitting there, transfixed by the mask. I handed him the scotch and he looked at me with a start. He downed it in one gulp and then began. 35 years ago, my father committed suicide. Oh, I said, looking down at my shoes, "I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I don't tell people that, and I definitely don't tell them what happened after that." "Look, can you just bring the bottle in?" I was glad to get out of the room for a moment. Things had gotten intense in there. He needed to know why Derek was having such an extreme reaction to the mask, and he was my friend, so I wanted to support him. I just didn't know if I was capable of hearing whatever he was going to say. I needed the bottle as much as him, or so I thought at the time, and I was right. I grabbed the bottle from the liquor cabinet and went directly back to Derek. I handed it to him and he took a good swallow. "The coroner ruled my father's death a suicide. Open and shut, he said, no need to waste money on an autopsy." But my mother had different ideas. "Do you know where my mother is now, Bill?" "No," I said. "She's in the place where they pad the rooms and scribble in coloring books all day." I took a drink and passed the bottle back. "Shit, Derek, I'm sorry." Derek laughed. It was a strange laugh, devoid of humor or any emotion at all. "She said that it was the masked man that did it. She said she came in to find the masked man holding the bone knife, watching my father bleed out in the bathtub. She passed out and he was gone when she woke up." I looked at Derek in shock. "What are you saying here?" Derek took 2 swallows from the bottle. "I'm saying I've seen that mask before. My mother's drawn it 1,000 times, the raise, the round face, the round eyes, the double teeth. That knife too. The bone knife." I heard the words that he was saying, but I couldn't process them. "Now you're the one fucking with me," I said at last. I gotta admit, for a minute there, you had me. "Now come on and pass that bottle over." "I'm calling the police," said Derek. Then he did. I remember when my parents had the basement redone. I was 10 years old. It was an old house, so the foundation used to be set on boulders with a dirt floor. It started to fail, so they spent a lot of money to have it all reinforced with concrete. A thick slab was poured on the floor. The bodies weren't difficult to find. The initials had been etched into the weight concrete, and when the floor was broken apart under police orders, each victim was resting right under his or her initials. 11 bodies in all. And those are only the ones in the basement. It's not clear how many there were, like Derek's father, that never made it down there. Well, all of a sudden, my father's late nights at the office when I was a kid started to make sense. We've since moved out of the house, and it's on the market. Nobody will buy it. I don't blame them. Derek won't return my calls. I don't blame him. I never did anything wrong, but my father did things that were very wrong, and I am his son. I wish I'd never found that mask. "So what time you gonna be here?" Tyler asked me impatiently, his voice obviously frustrated, because the storm's gonna hit any second and I want to get dinner cooked now in case the power goes out. I glanced up at the gray ski from underneath my umbrella and saw a large front of ominous-looking clouds steadily drifting this way. No joke. I replied loudly as I shouted over the scene to falling rain and thunder. "I'm on the corner of Eldred and Warren now, so I'll be there in 5 minutes." "Alright, I'll start the oven now." Rashleigh flinched at a particularly loud crack of thunder and quickened my pace. "What are we eating anyway?" I asked to keep my mind occupied and help me ignore the swishing of my soaking wet socks. Guess, Tyler responded, and I could imagine his cocky grin. I sighed knowingly. "Pepperoni pizza with black olives and jalapenos." "Pepperoni pizza with black olives and jalapenos?" "Yes, sir, that is correct." Tyler began. "It is the ultimate comfort food as you get a little bit of everything. You got your vegetables and your dairy and your wheat and... Are you here yet?" I looked around, confused. "In the rain?" "No." "Oh, never mind then." Thought I heard the doorbell. I shook my head. "You don't even have a doorbell. You complained about it yesterday?" The rainwater was collecting now, running down the streets and sidewalks in a rapid torrent. I could see the stream break against my boots, carrying dirt and leaves and little twigs with it. I shivered as the wind blew harder and cast misty spray against my face and neck. Ryda slipped and caught myself against a fence post. "Hey man, I'll be there in a bit. I'm hanging up before I bust my ass in my new phone. See you." "See ya." A nation. I hung up and slid my cell into my pocket. A flash of lightning lit up the sky and I blinked away the afterimages as I trudged along the line of yards where the sidewalk ended. I grimaced as my boots slurped in and out of the mud with sickening wet squelches, letting me know I would soon be filthy. I cursed it under my breath and silently berated myself for getting talked into this. I should have stayed home. Walking 3 miles through the rain with a storm on the way just to hang out was a terrible idea. Should have just stayed in bed. My curmudgeonly conversation with myself continued for several minutes until, at long last, sopping wet and freezing, I found myself on the doorstep of TJ's new house. It was old and weathered with faded paint and windows, so scratched they looked foggy. The grass, despite the rain this autumn had brought, was yellow and dead. I walked up the cracked driveway and to the front door. I knocked on it loudly and shivered as I wrapped my arms around myself. No answer. I knocked again, banging my fist against the wooden door so hard flecks of chipped green paint broke off and flittered to the ground. Tyler, it's me. Open the damn door. The door swung open with a loud creak and Tyler's face smiled at me from within. Sorry, man. Couldn't hear you over all the noise. He waved me inside and I kicked off my boots and threw my jacket in the corner to get the wet chill off of me. He looked me over and laughed, his green eyes crinkling at the corners as he guffawed at my current state. So how'd it go? He asked sarcastically. I groaned and headed down the hall. Lovely, now where's your bathroom? First door on the left. Pizza's almost done at least. He called after me as I patted down the wood floors in jeans heavy with rainwater. The house was bigger than I expected. Sure, it was old and needed a lot of work done, but it was good-sized. It had that old 70s style layout with lots of little rooms sectioned off into their own areas. As such, I didn't see much of the place as I walked past closed doors to get to the bathroom. The door at the end of the hall inched open as I approached, then shut a moment later. Guess his roommates aren't the chatty type. Works for me. I lolled off in the bathroom and laid my jeans out to dry. Slipping into a pair of sweatpants Tyler had sat on the counter, I flicked the light off and went down the hall toward the kitchen to get some pizza, my stomach growling ravenously. The door at the end of the hall squeaked open behind me, and then the bathroom door closed. I looked over my shoulder and saw the bathroom light on again. Here's your half, Tyler announced and set 4 slices of pizza on the table. TV signal's out due to the weather, but we can still watch a movie. Sounds good. I mumbled through a mouthful of piping hot pizza and followed him into the living room. The house was dark, I noted, in every room. The floors were all wood. No carpet, and the walls were painted a deep gray like the thunderclouds overhead. The lights seemed dim despite having new bulbs and made color wash away and fade. I shivered. Tyler glanced at me, still cold. I got a hoodie you can wear? I nodded, and he tossed a red pullover my way. Some comedy I wasn't really paying attention to played on the television. Tyler laughed here and there, sometimes repeating the jokes and pointing, but I felt detached. I set my pizza down. Appetite diminished and flinched as one of the bedroom doors in the house slammed shut. I could hear them moving around in their room, possibly rearranging furniture, and glanced at Tyler to see if he had reacted to the noise. But he hadn't. But having lived only on my own since graduation, I wasn't used to having someone else in the house. My apartment was small, not quite cramped, but certainly on the cozy side. As such, I had everything exactly as I wanted it and not a single thing out of place. It was quiet and well lit with thick, hushy carpet and central heating. 1 bedroom, 1 bath. Zero roommates making such a ruckus. Yesy of salary, I opened my mouth to voice such concerns, then realized it could come off as snobbish. I bit my lip and kept silent, not wanting to offend my friend by insulting his new house and roommate whom I had never met. You full already? Tyler asked me and I shrugged. Not really hungry, I guess. Well, damn. He reached out and snatched up my remaining slices. I'll take that off your hand. My mouth felt dry and sticky. So I got up and walked over to the kitchen, my mind still wandering as I listened to the commotion going on in the next room. There was a loud scraping like someone dragging a bed or dresser, and I could feel the vibrations rumbling through the floor. I sipped on my tea and looked around the kitchen, noting the lack of appliances and that there were only 2 chairs at the table. The scraping stopped suddenly. The bedroom door creaked open loudly, and I looked up from my cup expecting to see someone coming down the hall. Instead, I heard a different door open and shut, followed by loud thumping like someone jumping up and down. What the hell are they doing in there? Tyler laughed loudly as a series of shouts echoed from the flat screen and into the empty house. I glanced at him and then to the TV when the light in the kitchen went out. A door slammed in the hall. The movie continued playing and I could see the light on the microwave still blinking. Cheap-ass bulbs. I groaned and went to turn the light off before switching the light bulb out when I paused. The light switch was down. I glanced back at Tyler, then peered around the hall. The endless knocking and banging around still going strong? So what's the deal with this place? I asked aloud as I flipped the switch and the light came back on. What do you mean? Tyler asked after a moment's distraction as he paused the movie. Measaji said towels in the lumpy chair his dad had given him and gestured to the house as a whole with my hands. Like, how'd you get it? And from who? Oh, just some old man, Italian, I think. Mr. Scarpino or something like that. I waited for him to continue, but he just took a bite of pizza. And how'd you hear about it? She shrugged. Just saw it posted online. Me and like 2 other guys came and looked at it. One of them got it. Then the old man called me like a week later saying it was available and I moved in. I chewed my lip. Why was it open again? The guy moved out, just up and left. The wall behind me jolted violently and knocked over a bottle of whiskey Tyler had on display. It shattered and splashed across the floor, leaving the house suddenly silent. Tyler cursed loudly and jumped up to clean it. Alright, enough of this crap. I don't care if it's rude, this is nothing compared to what the douchebag in the other room is doing. I sighed and sat my tea down as Tyler threw a towel over the spilled liquor. Hey man, seriously, what's up with your roommate? Tyler looked up from the towel and laughed, his eyes staring up at the ceiling before meeting mine. That's how I got the place so cheap. I tilted my head to the side, confused. So what? He just pays a bigger share of rent. He laughed again and sat down, looking around for the remote. The commotion in the room escalated suddenly to an all-time high, and I grew tense. My fingers dug into the armrests of my chair. The walls rattled and shook as if there were an earthquake, even the windows jostling flimsily. Tyler pressed play on the remote, the couch beneath him creaking as the impacts against the wall hit it. No man. He glanced at me out of the corner of his eye. I don't have a roommate. I can't prove that this is true. No one I've told believes me, and I'm really just tired of telling the story and getting into the inevitable debates over plausibility. But I know what happened and figured the community here may at least have more of an open mind about the experience. If anything, I can at least get the whole story written out without being ridiculed. It was about 1.5 years ago I started attending college. After filling out mountains of applications and jumping through nonsensical hoops, I finally received notice about where I had been accepted. My first choice, UGA, had actually accepted me, which was great. But another college accepted me as well, Kennesaw State University. Now this school was notably less prestigious than Tech, but was still one of the largest in Georgia. However, I had never even toured the place. I just sent the app out, going through the motions, so I decided I should at least give the place a fair chance and promptly decided to view the campus before making a final decision. The day was raining, and the grounds of the university were riddled with mud and soaked patches of freshly planted grass. There were only a few of us in the tour group since it was getting close to the fall registration deadline, and the tour ended early due to the light rainfall increasing to a thunderous downpour. Not exactly pleased with the minimal view of the campus, I opted to explore on my own. Luckily, I had a backup poncho in my car I donned before walking around and checking out the place. Thunder crackled above me and the rain increased as if determined to stop me from proceeding. But I pressed on, exploring more of the campus. As I journeyed through the buildings of the small campus, I realized all the buildings I'd gotten to were closed down. It seemed odd. After all, it was still summer. Shouldn't classes be going on? And on that note, the student body seemed non-existent. That wasn't such a big deal. After all, it was a disastrous storm. But still. I hadn't seen a single soul since the tour group broke up. Eventually, I made my way to one of the dorm areas, named University Place. It was a small grouping of dorms that resembled apartments, though they were far off from the main campus, as if hidden away. I quickly found shelter under an overhang to briefly get out of the weather. A poncho is only so useful when it gets torrential. And that's when I noticed that a door to one of the dorms was open. Just wide open, I walked past it, trying not to be too obvious, but I glanced in. No one was home though. I could see a TV alongside the wall was lit up. Normally I wouldn't try and intrude, but I was determined to at least get to see some part of the campus more in depth. I walked to the door and knocked on the wall inside, yelling to see if anyone was inside. No answer. I knocked again, this time taking a step inside as I did. Still no answer. I decided it wouldn't hurt to at least take a look around the living room. So I headed inside, removing the poncho and leaving it at the doorway and slipping my drenched shoes off as well. I called out a final time as I walked into the main living area, to no avail. I looked over at the TV, which was stuck on static. No noise though. I walked over and turned it off, noticing that the place seemed vacant, but with signs of life. An open pizza box with food still inside was on a table in the living room, though it was inhabited by flies, seemingly left alone for days. As I walked through the room, I noticed a smell wafted into my nose that was incredibly displeasing. It smelled like rotting meat. Part of me told me to get out, but the other part was insisting I keep walking. I crept towards the smell, realizing it was coming from the kitchen. I slowly approached, the smell becoming more poignant as I got closer. I reached the sink and found just that rotting meat, infested with maggots writhing in the chunk of beef. It was disgusting and disturbing. I nearly vomited from the sight and smell, quickly turning around and leaving the kitchen, only to realize the TV was back on. Maybe it was some odd setting on the TV that made it turn back on. At this point, I was getting pretty creeped out. I turned the TV off again and even unplugged it from the wall. I decided it was a good time to leave and started towards the still open doorway. That's when I heard it. Do you thump? I nearly jumped at the noise, but tried to keep my composure. It came from the room near the doorway, labeled Awe. Now I've seen enough horror movies to know that you don't go towards the noise. You run away from the noise. So that's what I did. I went straight towards the door and grabbed my poncho, ready to leave. Suddenly, the door flew closed right in front of me, slamming itself shut against the door frame. I nearly fell over from the surprising motion and quickly shuffled backwards. I stared in awe, trying to figure out what had happened. I lurched forward and tried to twist the knob to no avail. It was as if the door was locked from the other side. I pounded on it and cried out, yelling for help, frantically twisting the knob as hard as I could. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone to call for someone, only to see that no bars were available. Fantastic. Eventually, I gave up looking around the room for any other way out. I soon realized that the actual dorm rooms had windows in them, which I could maybe use to escape. I could practically feel my heart pounding in my chest as I came to the realization that something was really going wrong here. Was it a joke gone wrong? Was someone deliberately trying to freak me out? If so, it was working, and then I heard another thump, louder this time, still coming from that room. As much as I didn't want to approach it, that room seemed like it could have someone in it, which would be my best bet at getting the hell out. I got up and advanced towards the door, and quickly realized the TV was on again. The static was lighting up the screen, even though the TV was unplugged still. I ignored it. My only concern was getting out at this point. I knocked on the door once, then waited. No answer. I knocked again. No answer. I called out. Nothing. I gripped the knob and turned it, feeling the door give as I pushed it open slowly. The room was dark, and the outside weather made it impossible to see anything more than the vague outlines of the furniture, a bed and a desk with some knickknacks here and there. I called out, trying to figure out if someone was there, with no answer. I flicked the light switch, but nothing happened. I crept into the room towards the window. It was my ticket at escaping, and I thought about nothing else, until the covers on the bed rustled. I jumped, backing against the wall. Hello? I called out. Nothing. Are you okay? I asked what I presumed to be the dorm inhabitant. Again, nothing. I reached towards the bed and gripped the cover, ready to pull it off. Slowly, I dragged the bedding off the figure and stepped over to the uncovered being. What I saw made me gag and stifle vomit. It was a man not much older than me, with his eyes and mouth sewn shut, dried blood caked around both orifices. He was naked and had some sort of odd symbol cut into his chest, more blood surrounding it. I stared at him, still unsure about what I was seeing. And then his head turned, twisting towards me. He let out a small moan, which made my blood run cold and created a powerful sense of fear within me. I quickly threw off the sheets and ran to the window. I unhinged the locks and pulled up on it as hard as I could, a metallic screeching accompanying its movement. Cold breeze shot in from outside. I didn't care. I was getting out. I forced the window open, the outside rain flying in as I did, and I began to climb out into the world. I tumbled into a bush outside and quickly got up, looking back to make sure that thing wasn't following me. Oddly enough, there was nothing in the bed now. It was vacant. But I didn't care. I ran and kept running. I got to my car, got in, and drove away. I always have nightmares about that experience. I have no ideas about what happened, and I don't want to think about it any more than that. All I know is I'm never going back there. In fact, I swore off college completely after that. It sounds stupid, but it was an experience I'll never be able to shake off. Especially. I thought I would feel some relief typing it out and getting it out in the open, but after going through that, it didn't help at all. It still scares the hell out me. I've decided to share this here because honestly, I feel like I need to talk about this before I go crazy, and this is probably the only place where I could talk about this and not have people think that I'm crazy. My name is Elizabeth Black. I've lived in New York pretty much most of my life without really having anything strange happen to me. Never seen a ghost, never saw a UFO, and no, before you ask, never bumped into a tall, pale, faceless guy with nice taste in suits. Me and my girlfriend Joan have lived in the same apartment for the past 7 years, without having anything bizarre or unusual happen to either of us. And I guess that's still the case now. Because this story isn't really about what happened to me, this story is about what happened to my brother Alan. This all happened last Christmas when he'd come over to visit. It had been really nice. My girlfriend is an amazing cook, and she made the most delicious turkey I think I've ever tasted. We played party games, watched Disney films and cheesy Christmas specials on the TV, tuned into the Doctor Who Christmas special too, as we're both longtime sci-fi nuts. Alan was a dick and teased us about it, but a well-aimed cushion to the head got him to stop being a jerk. All in all, it was a pretty great Christmas day. The presents were wonderful, including certain special presents my very own naughty Mrs. Claus got me that I was very glad my brother didn't see, and we all enjoyed ourselves so much. But eventually it came time for Alan to head on home, and so a few days later we headed down to where he was going to get his train. I went with him and we made small talk, chatted about little, inconsequential things. I asked what his plans for the new year were. He asked how my job was going. You know, that kind of thing. While we were waiting for his train though, that's when we both noticed something that was kind of odd. There was a man sat on one of the chairs in the train station, not too far away from us. He was dressed in a neat black suit, red tie, black gloves, and a pair of sunglasses, despite the fact that it definitely was not the kind of weather you'd need those in. He had a small smile on his face as he rocked back and forth on the seat, singing to himself softly. I recognized the song as Unforgettable, and he would hum bits of it, then sing a few words before going back to humming away. And on his lap was a shoebox. "What do you think's inside?" Alan asked after a while, obviously having noticed that I was staring as well. I shrugged. "Shoes, I guess," I replied. He laughed. "Come on, where's your imagination? Don't you want to be a big fancy writer one day? You can come up with something better than that," he said with a grin. "Okay. It's a collection of severed hands. He's a serial killer, prowling the train station, waiting to harvest them from unsuspecting victims," I suggested. "Nice. Okay, so why?" Alan prodded, urging me on. I thought for a moment before continuing. "A former hand model. His own were burned in a freak grease fire, which is why he wears the gloves. It drove him mad and left him with a deep-seated loathing of all those blessed with unscarred hands. And now he takes a terrible vengeance upon them all," I said, feeling rather proud of that little bit of nonsense. My brother giggled loudly, clearly amused. "Nay, it's a dragon," he said. "A dragon? In New York?" I asked, and he nodded eagerly. "He's a hunter and trader of rare and mythical beasts. He goes to the furthest corners of the earth, seeking out creatures most don't even believe exist, bringing them back to sell to eccentric private collectors all over the world," he said as I shook my head in amusement. "You've been reading too much Harry Potter." "You dork," I said, and then I noticed Alan had stopped smiling and was looking at something behind me. Turning, I saw that the man was stood beside me now, smiling down at me pleasantly, the box still clutched in his hand. "Good afternoon. I couldn't help but overhear your conversation," he said in a polite voice with what sounded like a slight Australian accent. Was honestly so surprised to just see him standing there that the apology I attempted just became a rather stupid sounding series of noises and mumbled half-formed words. He certainly didn't seem threatening or angry, but turning around to see him had been a shock, and that coupled with the embarrassment of realizing he'd heard our conversation made me have what my girlfriend likes to refer to as one of my blonde moments. "Please, no need to feel embarrassed. I thought it was very amusing. I simply wished to ask if either of you would like to see what is in the box," he continued. Alan leaned forward, clearly intrigued, reaching for the box only for the man to move it out of reach of his hands, taking a step back, his expression never changing. "Not here. Please follow me," he said before walking off, not even bothering to look back to see if we were walking after him. Alan stood to follow, and I reached out, grabbing hold of his arm to stop him. I don't know why. After all, the man certainly seems perfectly nice, and it's not like my brother was a child, but something about this just seemed way too weird to me. Blame watching too many horror movies or just the news, because living in New York, you heard plenty of stories about terrible things happening. And just because the guy seemed nice didn't mean he wasn't some kind of weirdo. "Come on, you know you're curious," Alan said, tugging free of my grip and heading around the corner after the man. With a sigh, I decided to follow, seeing that he'd come to a stop outside one of the public toilets. "Please, step inside and I shall show you," the man said before entering, the door closing behind him. At this point, any apprehension I'd had pretty much tripled, because this had gone from weird to creepy. Outside of porn, I didn't know many scenarios where following weird-looking strangers into grimy public toilets ever ended well. But my brother, genius that he was already starting to head towards the door before I grabbed him. "Are you crazy? Seriously, best case scenario, this guy is a rapist. Worst case, he's some kind of serial killer who's planning to make you into a skin suit," I growled angrily at him, but he swatted my hand aside, laughing off my concerns. "Please. Do you see him? The guy looks like a gentle breeze could snap him in two. I've been boxing since college, and you've got that freaky upper body strength. Between the two of us, we could mash him into paste in about 5 seconds if he tried anything he said." But I had to admit he did have a point. The man in black certainly didn't seem like much of a threat, and even if he had some kind of weapon in the box, it wouldn't take much to take him down before he got the chance to use it. Still, I wasn't about to let my brother put himself into harm's way, all to find out what was in some stupid shoebox. No. Besides, what does it matter anyway? It's not like he's going to have something that can turn lead into gold or tell your future in there. He's just some weird, creepy guy who's probably got a dead cat in there or something, I snapped. Alan sighed, probably realizing that he wasn't going to be getting his way, and nodded. Then he jerked his head to the side, a look of shock on his face. Hey, how the hell did he get over there? He asked, and like an idiot I turned to look, to see nothing. And the second my eyes were off him, he bolted through the door before I could stop him. To this day, I feel like such a moron for fooling for a trick as cliched as, hey, look behind you, but I didn't have time to kick myself at that moment. Moving quickly, I went to the door of the restroom, pushing hard on it, ready in case anything was wrong, and the door didn't budge. But I took a step back, feeling seriously afraid now before shoving harder on the door. Nothing. I took a few steps back and took a running kick at it. The door didn't even seem to register the blow at all. Desperate, now I started to hammer on the door, calling my brother's name, asking if he was alright, my fist beating against the hard material, feeling fear flooding my body. And then the screaming began. I can't put into words how awful it was. Those screams, I sometimes hear them in my dreams, and when I do, I wake up sweating, shivering, feeling sick to my stomach. These weren't just screams of pain or of fear. I honestly can't really describe how it felt to listen to them. Not properly. I've never heard screams like those, not in real life or in the movies, and the way they made me feel at that moment, it was just horrible. I guess the only way to try and give you an idea of how I felt is like this. You know, when you're watching a movie and the music gets real tense and you get that feeling in your gut where, something terrible is about to happen, that kind of sick apprehension, that's how this felt 100 times over. When the door finally opened, finally yielded to me shoving against it. I stumbled inside, no idea what I might see. My brother was crouched on the floor. He was fully clothed, uninjured, and just staring at the ground, and he was alone. I ran to him, not caring at first where the man had gone, wrapping my arms around him as he shook in my grip. I held him tight like I had done when we were kids and he'd had a nightmare, just wanting to make sure he was all right. He was damp with sweat in his eyes were bloodshot, wide and staring and bloodshot. The expression on his face was one of absolute horror. I can't remember ever seeing him afraid like he was in that moment. There was no sign of the man anywhere in the room. I called first the police, then my girlfriend, and stood there beside my brother as we waited for them to arrive. The police took statements and a description of the man. I left out the part where he'd vanished because honestly, as if they would ever take me seriously if I told them that. I just said he'd slipped past me while I'd been concerned over keeping Alan safe. To this day, he's never been found. The doctors checked Alan out and found no signs of injury or assault. He seemed to be perfectly fine, except that he didn't seem to remember a thing about what had happened from the moment he followed the man to the moment I came in after him. It was just one big blank. Both I and Joanne have suggested that he talk to therapists now and then, but he always refused. I don't think he wants to remember what happened that day, and I can't really say that I blame him. I'm not sure I want to know what happened either. Maybe there are some things that it's better to forget. Some things that people just shouldn't have to live with the memory of. There are things that I wish I could forget about that day as well. The look on my brother's face, the feel of him quivering in my arms in sheer terror, and the sound of those screams. Sometimes I want to tell someone, my girlfriend, my mother, someone, what it is about the memory of those screams that upsets me so much. Because it isn't just how they sounded, terrible as it was, it's the fact that even though Alan and the smiling man in the suit were the only ones in that room, sounded like hundreds, though the stands of people were all screaming at once. Driving along the back roads at night can be a little eerie. Not if you're country folk like myself, but if you're used to lights and other cars and nightlife. A back road at 10 o'clock at night can seem pretty unsettling. There are millions of back roads in upstate New York. Roads that pass through foggy fields, dense forests, old forgotten cemeteries, ancient churches, and abandoned houses. Because of the manner of the back road, fast driving isn't suggested. A hidden turn can flip a fast-moving car right over or send a speeder rocketing into the trees. When you're on a back road, you drive carefully, with your brights on, hoping nothing jumps out in front of your car and strands you on the road where you're out of luck as far as cell phone service goes. There aren't many towers in rural New York, and getting a signal out here is about as likely to happen as striking oil. But I'm used to these back roads. I've been driving on them for years, and I usually know how to navigate one pretty easily. I already know the pointlessness of cell phones when the city lights wink out, so I don't feel the surge of fear for losing all my bars. I keep driving, keep my eyes on the road, and never stop for anything. It was a chilly night in late September, the night sky filled with stars while the moon was new. I had just finished a shift at the hospital and took one of the many back roads home. It's a good way to avoid traffic and police generally. I had the radio tuned to a local station, just passing the drive with some mindless pop to break up the silence of the ride home. It was just an average night home, no one else on the road but me, until the fog rolled in. Now, fog in September doesn't happen often in upstate New York, especially not in late September. It's starting to get too cold for that. The water in the air just froze as frost. However, one moment I was driving past an open field, and the next my car was blanketed in icy cold, impermeable fog. The temperature in my car sank immediately. Even as I cranked up the heat, it was as if the fog was trying to get into the car itself, wrapping itself around the tires and engine in an attempt to choke the life out of it. Breathing fog at this point myself, I applied a little more force to the gas and pressed on, forced to turn down the lights on my car as the high beams just created an ungodly amount of glare on the fog. It wasn't long before I saw the frost creeping over my windshield, like lacy fingers clawing across the glass. It grew quickly, cutting swirling bolts across the glass as the fog thickened. The defroster did nothing, and my car was slowed to a creep as the passenger and driver's side windows iced over. Still, my foot remained stuck on the gas, and I peered through the veil of frost and fog as best I could. There could be no stopping on a back road at night. Even as the engine began to sputter and whine, the car inched forward continuously, refusing to stop for anything. At some point, I began to become aware of shapes just beyond the frost on the windows. It was impossible to tell what they were under the layer of delicate ice. Impossibly white, but somehow lacking in light, their forms were impossible to discern. The car pressed on at a snail's pace as the white figures danced closer and closer to the car. They were like sheets caught in the wind, only capable of reflecting what was shone at them. Apparently shapeless, it must have been the interaction of fog with the ice on the glass. I just refused to look at them. No stopping, do not take your eyes off the road. The fog must have dampened the signal to the radio, because soon the only thing blaring from the speakers was screeching static, garbled words thrown in from the mangled bubblegum pop song that was playing just a moment earlier. It was when the words started to make sense again that I shut the radio off entirely. Whatever was coming out of there now, it certainly wasn't music, and it definitely wasn't helping me drive anymore. I would have taken Justin Bieber over whatever that was. But it seemed to coalesce with the motions the white figures outside the car were making. The car kept moving, and my eyes stayed on the road. The creaking and groaning the engine was making was starting to turn into a steady thumping. At least I assumed that it was the engine making the thumping, until the sound started to rattle the backseat windows. My fingers tightened on the steering wheel, and the thumps turned to desperate scrapes, nails dragging down the iced-over glass. I didn't look back at what was making the sound. I didn't even blink, my mouth and eyes starting to dry out as the scraping was accompanied by a different sound. A steady, incoherent, hideous gurgling. The white figures had gathered, dancing around the car, skirting around the front of it as it pressed into their ranks and past them. Faces pressed against the iced-over windows, sometimes revealing faces, or half of faces. Sunken, beady eyes, lips that had been chewed to ribbons, or noses that were either barely there or had long since been eaten away. Nails screamed over the metal hull of my car, the gurgling both pathetic and horrifying as the car occasionally hit an especially giving bump. It rolled over the lump slowly, and it was impossible to miss the organic, visceral crunch under the tire. Words were mouthed against the glass, pleas distorted by pulped tongues and rotted throats. My teeth were clenched tight until they ground against each other in my jaw, one threatening to pop and break. Still, my foot never left the gas, and my eyes never left the road. The entire car rattled. I could feel it shaking under my hands, the cough and whine of the tortured engine, the grinding of gears and the hollow racket the dashboard made as unseen hands pounded and scraped against the car. There was only forward. There was no back or stop. Not now, not ever. Don't look away, don't panic. Just go forward. And the fog broke. The car inched out of the mire, and almost immediately the ice began to melt from the windshield. The engine sputtered once, and then roared. The tires churned up grit beneath it before I slammed on the gas and rocketed through the rest of the ride home. Don't look back, don't stop. I made it back to my house an hour later, and was quick to run into my warm room and bury myself under my blankets. My dad had a few questions for the next day. He wanted to know who had keyed my car up so badly at the hospital the other day. Each door on the car had long, raking marks down it, the sheen of the metal underneath glaring through. I told him I didn't know. I think I'll be taking the main road home tonight.